Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am First Lieutenant Trey G. Rowley from the 89th Maintenance Group, Joint Base Andrews. I am pleased to introduce to you our keynote speaker for the 2021 Logistics Officer Association Symposium. General C.Q. Brown is the 22nd Chief of Staff of the Air Force. As Chief, he serves as the Senior Uniformed Air Force officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of 689,000 active duty, Guard, Reserve, and civilian forces serving in the United States and overseas. As a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he serves as a military advisor to the Secretary of Defense, National Security Council, and the President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, General Brown.
Well, good morning. And let me start off with a quote from General Dwight D. Eisenhower. And I quote, "You will not find it difficult to prove that battles, campaigns, and even wars have been won or lost primarily based on logistics." In the past 25 years, there's been quite a bit of military focus in the Middle East, and we've become comfortable operating in permissive environments where our logistics are uncontested. At the same time, the strategic environment has changed, but we haven't changed at the same pace. Coming in this position, I wrote my strategic approach: accelerate, change, or lose, calling attention to the changes in the strategic environment, because good enough today will fail tomorrow. It's time to accelerate change, to tackle the tough problems and prepare Air Force for the future, so we can better compete, deter, and when called upon to do so, fight and win America's wars. Before I go any further, I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you this morning. Thanks to Lieutenant Trey Riley for the introduction. Thanks to Colonel Ken Benton, who's leading this particular symposium. And then to our Chief Logistician across the Air Force, Lieutenant General Warren Berry. And all the logisticians across the Air Force for what you do and execute the mission every day. It's great to talk to all the professionals about what's important, logistics, because they say amateurs talk tactics. So with that, I'd like to spend some time discussing my strategic approach and then highlight some of the areas I've been thinking about when it comes to supporting capabilities. Now, I've been in the chair here for just over 7 months. About 3 weeks after I came into this job, I laid out accelerate, change, or lose. Some of that was based on my experience as the PACAP commander, but it's also what I saw when the 2018 National Defense Strategy came out and highlighted that our advantage was eroding. We're losing aspects of our national security as a real possibility, and our ability to compete was at risk. I really felt that we weren't moving fast enough. And so the strategic approach lays out the details of the why we need to accelerate. In pursuit of the strategic approach, I also produce the action orders. They talk about the how and what we're going to focus on. It's as simple as A, B, C, and D: airmen, bureaucracy, competition, and design implementation. To tie all that together, what I've worked with the air staff, and particularly with the vice chief and our A5, is the first principles of the Air Force's 5 core mission areas: air superiority, global strike, rapid global mobility, ISR, and command and control. All these kind of come together to actually determine how best we move forward as an Air Force. It does a couple things for us. It helps us to inform our decision making, but also helps to ensure we're accountable to the missionaries across the United States Air Force and what we contribute to the joint team. It will help us to address the actions and the toughest choices required by Air Force to achieve our future Air Force design. And as we all know, logistics is critical to each one of those 5 core mission areas. Logistics determines our success or failure in all that we do. We must fully expect that our logistics will be under attack in future warfare. There are no safe havens. We must take action and make tough choices required to ensure resilient, persistent logistics for future operations. So let me share what I think when it comes to supporting our capabilities. As the previous PACAP commander, I thought a lot about logistics, especially in the Indo-PACOM area responsibilities, because it covered more than 50% of the globe's surface. And some things I think we're taking a look at through a different lens. And so, for example, when I was at Guam just over a year ago, looking at our war reserve materiel, I really thought we needed to take a different aspect and look at WRM. and view it more as a capability and less as a commodity. In the past, I kind of equated it to going to Costco, where you had things in bulk laid out by different rows by commodity. You had to go through with your big shopping cart and figure out what capabilities you needed to pull together, what commodities you needed to pull together to build your capability, and take that out the door to go to do our mission. I would submit we need to think differently about how we approach things. And so our WRM needs to be packaged by capabilities with the right mix of commodities. At the same time, we need to have a plan to have rotational use and be able to maintain that capability. Too often, when I would talk to our airmen that were maintaining the WRM, what they would find was once you open up the package, you get ready to go, you forgot it didn't work. And so we got to actually use it on a regular basis, maintain it on a regular basis to make sure we have the capability when it's called upon to do so. At the same time, we need to pre-position some of those capabilities instead of waiting to execute a tip fit. And the timelines it's going to take us to execute the tip fit, it may be over by the time we get there. And so I'm really a big fan of pre-positioning. And I think about how we would take, modify and tailor our WRM into a capability package, how we would disperse those across the various AORs. And I think about how we'd actually, instead of doing the tip fit in a matter of days and weeks, we do it over several years and have it pre-positioned. At the same time, I look at those small tailored capability packages, and instead of shipping unit-owned equipment around the world for exercises, some of that already pre-positioned different locations that we'd be able to use in exercise mode. I also think about push logistics. I think about what I see in my day-to-day life with I see on Amazon, with the Amazon Dash. When you can sign up for a subscription, it just keeps delivering on a recurring basis of what you need. I think we have enough data in execution. We go into combat. We'd be able to understand what each location would need. And we just start pushing the logistics to them. You could always modify your subscription as you went forward. Matter of fact, you can cancel anytime if you want, probably because you moved to another location as you execute agile combat employment. We got to be able to make those adjustments based on the environment we're operating in and to be flexible. I've heard already about making this a reality with MyCap, the MyCap Prime concept. You're already taking Amazon's 2-day delivery concept and doing the same thing with our parts. But it's even more incredible. This idea came from one of our young airmen, and we'll have it implemented throughout the F-16 and KC-135 community by June. I really believe airmen can solve any problem if we just let them. With agile combat employment, there's a lot of good activity going across our major commands. And as an Air Force, I'd say we've been used to glamping by going to the Middle East, where we have a pre-positioned base. You just show up and unpack your bags. We got to get used to camping, where you're able to go into different places, set up, operate very quickly, and tear back down and move to the next location. That's what agile combat employment is all about. We have to get light, lean, and agile, and trust our airmen and empower them to make decisions. We need to unleash them to execute, and they will need to be multi-capable. For example, an airman needs to be able to unload the aircraft, then defend the base, and then break down the tents and be able to move to new locations. There should be no union cards across our Air Force. We all got to carry the load. We got to be team focused, looking at multiple tasks. I really think about our continuous response groups. That's what it's all about, where our airmen can do just about anything we allow them to do and be light, lean, and agile. We need to be able to disperse. We can't be sitting on a big base, which becomes a big target. We got to have multiple bases to complicate the targeting aspect for our adversaries. We had to have the flexibility to pick up and move fairly quickly. A great example is our FARP operations. They've been around since the 1980s with Operation Eagle Claw. Enables lean, agile ops, ability to move around in austere locations, and even refuel 5th-gen aircraft capability while we're in a contested fight. This is one example of specialized fuel operations. We need to be visionary about how we look at operations like FARP. And ACE is a way to do that through a different thought process across the Air Force. I really believe we're on the right path. We must understand and adapt to supporting the force on the move, similar to the way we support our joint counterparts. There are a few other things I look at when I think about persistent logistics that I'd like to challenge all of you to keep in mind. We need to have multiple options, be adaptable, be resilient, all with the ability to move quickly. And I'm proud to hear you're already doing moving out, using the theory of constraints and continuous process improvements to continue to innovate with Project Tesseract. The fact that you're looking at ways to become more productive without additional cost or manpower, that's something we need to be doing across the Air Force. So keep going. tell you one thing I find as a chief of staff when I go around and travel, every base I go to, there's always an ask for more money, more manpower. This is pretty cool. They're all doing it with a zero sum. And I think we need to do more of that, being able to give up some capability to get capability into the future. We can't pull back the throttle. We need to keep up the thrust. We need to ensure our logistics systems and our infrastructure are set up for success in a high-end fight. We need to ensure we're integrating command and control and information warfare specialists with operations leaders. Logisticians should be integrating with Advanced Battle Management System, JADC2, and should be leveraging available technology. We should be using artificial intelligence and machine learning and making changes to that Amazon order and making orders as we go. A good example of this is condition-based maintenance, integration of predictive processes to improve reliability and maintenance effectiveness. Since 2018, AMC has particularly replaced over 300 parts at home station before failure using condition-based maintenance. In cyber, we need to integrate with our communication and intel counterparts to understand the threats, the opportunities, and remaining proactive when it's time to move. Highly likely that our communications will be contested. At the same time, it'll challenge our supply and logistics systems. We need to be set up for contested communications. The logisticians need to be integrating with the operators when it comes to mission planning. The success or failure of future wars will be contingent on the leadership and preparation of our logisticians now. Ops can't be planned in a bubble. They expect logisticians to wave their magic wand and figure out how sometimes they're going to make it happen. At the same time, logisticians can't say I wasn't called or I didn't have the security clearance to be part of the operational planning. Do not wait to be called. Be bold, insert yourself, because logisticians have a need to know. Maybe not all the operational details, but they need to know enough to plan the logistics that will make the operation successful. This needs to be part of our cultural change across the Air Force. Logisticians need to be bold and push their way into doors that may have been closed to them in the past. They need to have more forethought on the operations, and not the afterthought. They need to be part of the shared responsibilities with the operators. We also need to look at how we would solve problems jointly instead of relying on just air assets alone for logistics. We need to lean on our joint teammates, use the maritime aspect as well as the surface assets to move capability around the world. We've talked about multi-capable airmen within ACE, but we need to also make sure we have multi-functional logisticians. We cannot be solely focused on our individual disciplines, but we must look holistically how we support not only the Air Force, but the joint force and our allies and partners. We need to look at adaptive manufacturing, producing parts and supplies at the place and point of need. It limits long logistics timelines and reach back and the opportunity to produce capability on site. Maybe it may require some organizational hurdles to overcome, but I know we can work through them. We can reach the point of producing airworthy parts. That's the goal. And finally, with our allies and partners. History has shown that we win with our allies and partners. They are our asymmetric advantage. We have to get creative on how we integrate with our partner air forces. We identify and break down the bureaucratic barriers to work with our allies and partners. We've been discussing and developing logistics under attack for the past couple of years, but we must remain focused on taking action because we can't continue just to study the problem. We have to put solutions in place. We must remain action-oriented, put a suspense with each concept, and we're going to bring it to bear. No, we won't be able to resource everything, but we must start somewhere, making small successes possible. But I also need leaders and logisticians willing to challenge the status quo, assess where change is required. We can't wait until the fight starts to change. It will be too late. Now, I can't do this alone at my level. It takes all of us to do this together, especially our young airmen with great ideas, and we need to empower them, unleash their young talent, just like MyCap Prime. I would challenge all of you. And if I tells you that we can't do something, well, maybe that's part of the bureaucracy. We need to take a look at cutting through that bureaucracy. And so what I would tell you and challenge you all, don't be afraid to drive change, because we all need to make tough decisions. And how well we design and develop these capabilities we need will be based on those tough decisions we're willing to make. I fully expect logistics operations will be part of that discussion as we move forward. And we all want what's best for our nation, but we must prepare and accelerate change now. We need to heed the lessons of the past from the great leaders like General Eisenhower. And so when called upon, our Air Force has the capability to fight and win against any adversary. We must prepare to be good enough, not just today, but well into the future. We want to win tomorrow. We must ensure that resilient, persistent logistics are ready to put us on the winning side. Thank you again for the opportunity to be with you this morning. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General. Speaking of questions, I do have a question for you, sir. In your action order, you mentioned, quote, programs that once held promise, but are no longer affordable or would not deliver needed capabilities on competition-relevant timelines must be divested or terminated. Sir, when it comes to our weapon systems, do you think we have reached that point with the F-35 and KC-46 program? And if not, why?
We're at the very beginning of it. I would say early stages of both the F-35 program and the KC-46. And I've actually just several weeks ago I had a chance to fly the KC-46 and actually refuel behind another KC-46. And great platform. Same with the F-35. A very capable platform. I was at Hill just a few weeks ago and had a chance to talk to the wing leadership, pilots and maintainers there on the F-35. Both great platforms. With every new platform, there's always a few bugs that we have to work through, and there's no difference for the F-35 and the KC-46. And so both of those will be relevant well into the future. And so when I think about some of the what you just quoted is that there are some capabilities. When I think about legacy platforms, the way I think about legacy platforms, not based on age, it's based on relevancy. If that platform is not going to be relevant today, won't be relevant in the future, or it's going to be so costly to make it relevant for the future, those are the things that we need to let go. The KC-46 and the F-35 are not on that list. And we got to make sure we put our weight behind that to make sure they're fully capable in the hands of our airmen.
Copy. Thank you, General. Our next question comes from Senior Airman Justin Smith.
Good morning, General Brown. I am Senior Airman Justin Smith, a C-130 crew chief and a Air Force gaming ambassador based out of the 314th AMXS out of Little Rock Air Force Base. I'd like to start out with saying that as a maintainer, my everyday involves the nitty-gritty. And as I reviewed in your writings on accelerate, change, or lose, I find it harder sometimes to connect my everyday with your everyday. So my question is, how would you recommend airmen at my level to actively participate in your vision?
Well, this goes into not only what I wrote in the Accelerate, Change, or Lose in the action orders, but it's also the letter to airmen that came out just a few weeks ago, where I talked about empowering airmen. And so for airmen like yourself, and really airmen at all levels, we need to challenge the status quo. And we need to ask why. So why do we do it this way? And maybe some of the things that we have laid out in the past were based on certain facts and assumptions. And I've always believed with time, the facts and assumptions will change, which is why in my remarks, I said, we need to challenge some of the AFIs on why we do what we do. And the thing I find here is that there is a frozen middle. No matter what level you're at, there's someone above you who actually probably has an opinion about something that may slow things down. And so part of that is really the dialogue that you have to have on why we should do this and have a good thought process in your recommendation and think it through. And I'd also tell you is don't give up. It's easy for folks to tell you no. That is the easiest thing they can do. It's hard to say yes. And so I think it's really important that you continue to push in anything that you really strongly believe on to be persistent and consistent. And particularly there's probably some things you do as a C-130 crew chief where you go, why do we do this? There's probably a better way to do this. And I'd encourage you to highlight those things and share that with your leadership, but also share that with the other airmen at your level. And many of you together can be a louder voice against maybe that one piece of the frozen middle that we can get past and make that change.
All right. Our next question comes from Colonel Bill Maxwell.
I'm Colonel Bill Maxwell, the Chief of the Aircraft Maintenance Division in your A4L. And my question relates to the Sustainment Strategy Framework, or the SSF, and your just cause of accelerating change. One of your charges to your A4 and to the greater sustainment enterprise is to materially improve the sustainment of our weapon systems through implementation of the SSF. These changes come in the form of reimagining our sustainment goals and practices, to enhance mission generation, improving material support, expanding repair network, and improving data analytics. These are enterprise level changes to optimize mission generation. This is not change in the margins. It's an evolution to the DNA of our sustainment practices that takes conscientious motivation. Your accelerate, change, or lose message is everywhere. And the image invoked in your word accelerate is fast. And to some, fast can seem contrary to evolutionary foundational change. So as we work on your priority to implement the SSF, we find it sometimes to be difficult to move large change quickly. So my question for you is, how would you advise people to consider the importance of the SSF and to integrate accelerating change into the long-term change called for in its implementation?
Yeah. Thanks, Colonel Maxwell. Pretty deep question there with the several parts. But here's the way I approach this. Particularly when you've got a kind of a big enterprise piece of this, we can actually lay out a big vision of what we want to be able to do, and we can talk a really good game. And that's great. But how are we going to get there? So we want to actually lay out where we want to look like several years from now. And what I've been focused on is 2030, 2035. And then from there, be able to look backwards and go, how do we take our initial steps in that direction? And how do we make, meaningful progress? And you're not going to be able to solve this, all of this at once. But pick some areas that we know we can get over the goal line and get that going. There's a book I just finished reading here just a couple of months ago called Crossing the Chasm. And it talks about getting across the first step is like a D-Day invasion. If you want to get across, we need to pick something that is, I wouldn't say easy, but meaningful, and show that we can do this. And then you can build a success and get past the naysayers. And then the other thing, I'm always big on POAMs, to lay out timelines as forcing functions to drive ourselves to deliver, because we've got to deliver. And so we can't talk a good game and not deliver. And then the last part of that, and this is what we just finished our MATCHCOM Commander Summit last week. And this is one of the things we talked about with the MATCHCOM commanders, is we've got to all step back from this. And they all have their equities as a MATCHCOM commander, but they also got to have their equity as a senior Air Force officer. Just like I have my two hats as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the Joint Chief. And I might not agree with myself as the Chief of Staff in the Air Force and the Joint Chief. The same thing for our MATCHCOM commanders. And we've got to take a look, when we talk our WSS and sustainment, we've got to step back from this. So as we make decisions in one area, we got to make sure we're considering how that impacts sustainment. And I don't know that we have the tools to do that right now, where I can pull a lever over here and see how it impacts our sustainment. Or if I change something in sustainment, how it moves a lever on the operational side. We've got to get to that. And we have the data to do it. We just got to connect that data, which is another brief we had last week. So we can actually see that to make better decisions, to be able to execute this, sustainment strategy that actually delivers the capability we're looking for. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir.
General, our next question comes from Captain Jackie Lockett.
Good morning, sir. I'm Captain Jackie Lockett. I'm coming to you virtually from Hill Air Force Base. It's really awesome to meet you like this today. My original question was really similar to Senior Airman Smith, so I'm going to adjust a little bit. But I really love what you said about the Air Force getting used to glamping. And we know that future conflict is definitely going to look differently. So how can CGOs and squadron level leaders be preparing our airmen for what's coming in the future? And how can we carry out your action orders at our level?
Good question. And part of this is as we, one way to get from glamping to camping is be light, lean, and agile. And just think about, if you were a backpacker, would you bring everything in your backpack and bring it with you if I told you had to carry it for 15, 20 miles? You'd probably figure out what things are important, what things are less important. And that's the things we got to be able to do. And so that's the aspect that as our airmen, we get ready to deploy for different exercises, training events, or for a contingency operation. We got to think about that aspect, and we're willing to take a little bit of risk of the things we don't bring with us, or figure out, as I say, if they already have a kitchen sink there, don't bring it with you. So it's assessment of where you're going and how you do that. And so that's one part of it. The other piece of this is, how do you look at multi-capable airmen and you start looking out and building out your deployment package? What airmen actually have the capability to do, different areas where they have some basic training, but there's somebody who actually knows what, fully trained. They can work with somebody else who has another skill set. And I've seen this in different locations where you can bounce back and forth. A good example, when I was at Guam and looked at our contingency response group, I was over talking to a senior airman, and she was setting up all the comm gear. And then 2 stations over, she's run across, and now she's in battle rattle helping defend the base. That's the kind of aspect of things we got to be thinking about, is how we use our airmen, because there'll be times where some are fully engaged, but there'll be, setting up the base versus now defending the base. You can move that back and forth. And we got to think about how we do that when we start deploying. And I would say you can try that in some of your local exercises or day-to-day operations, where you can see some things where you go, hey, there's probably a better way to do this. And I would encourage us to experiment with that. Now, the other part of that is make sure you're communicating too. Communicating up to your chain of command. Hey, we're doing an experiment. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what the risk is involved. Do the risk assessment, and then go out and execute, and then learn from that. And then we'll definitely learn some things as we go forward if we're able to take that approach. Thanks.
General, our next person is Dr. Keith Hardeman.
Good morning, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. Dr. Keith Hardeman from I'm a technical director, data officer for the Logistics CI Support Division and half A4P. And I heard you speak and, make references to data and how important it is as far as to your accelerating change vision. And I do agree with that. So my question is, how do we balance the need to accelerate change while incorporating what I would consider a diversity in not only manpower, but strategy, thought, and how we go about those things into our culture, and not necessarily deviate from the traditional approaches, but just incorporate those new types of thinking or elements to our culture, sir?
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. Hardeman. The things I think about when I think about accelerated change in people, our airmen, the goal here is for all of our airmen to reach their full potential. And how do we do that? Part of this is, how do we bring them into the force? How do we actually encourage them and mentor them in whatever job they're in, and be willing to talk to all different backgrounds? The other aspect of that is, when you start thinking about accelerated change for diversity, is being a little more meaningful in how we manage our talent. I think too often we let it kind of transpire by luck, and we got to be a little more engaged in how do we ensure that we have the right talent. And so one of the areas to do this is, broaden your slate of candidates that you look at. You may get a candidate slate when you're going to hire somebody or bring someone into your office. You may take a look at that slate and how much diversity does it have, and then you may ask for a broader slate. At the same time, if you have a selection board, you also want to have a selection board that the board members actually have a diverse background, because as they're asking questions, they'll look at it from a different perspective. And then we've got to be open. And what I mean by that is, we got to be open to feedback and dialogue about what different people see, and what they and what we all value is, we want someone who's quality, no matter their background. And that's the part that we've got to be thinking about. And I'll tell you what, any of our airmen, whether they're uniform or civilian, active or reserve component, they just want an opportunity. And that's part of our job, is to provide them the opportunity. And I'll tell you, you put some folks in a given opportunity, they will shine. I mean, how many times have you had the primary leave and the deputy picks up the ball and you go, I had no idea they had that skill set. We got to give them those opportunities. And I think that's what's going to help us with diversity, how we can accelerate and really use all the talents we have across our Air Force. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir.
So our next question comes from Wing Commander Roger Crumpman.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Wing Commander Roger Crumpman, Australian Exchange Officer in HAF A4PY. Sir, the National Defence Strategy focuses on a pivot to the Indo-Pacific and a reliance on allies and partners. When it comes to enabling agile combat employment, do you believe the USAF is adequately postured to leverage the logistics capabilities of allies? And if not, where do you see gaps?
Thanks for the question. I would say I give us a mixed review right now. And I will just tell you, this basically comes from my time as a PACAF commander, and our ability to leverage the aspect that we both fly C-130s and C-17s, but we don't intermingle our supply systems, where we can actually leverage our allies and partners who are flying pretty much the same aircraft. Or the fact of, as we start to move capability around the world, how we're able then to work more closely together to use the capabilities of in this case, the Royal Australian Air Force and their C-17s and C-130s. At the same time, we intermingle those with how we use our C-17s and C-130s around the region. So from that perspective, I think we missed some opportunities, and we signed a memo to kind of do that for C-130s. And I asked the question to my staff when I was a PACA commander, what took so long? Because we've been flying we've both been flying C-130s for a while, and sometimes I think we make it harder than it has to be. And so this is why I really make the point of we really got to identify these areas where we may have these bureaucratic barriers between our services. We can't just say allies and partners or put it on a PowerPoint slide and think it's just going to happen. We've got to work together very closely early in this process, well ahead of any type of contingency or conflict. Works in exercises, humanitarian assistance, disaster response, or a higher level contingency. We've got to solve many of those issues well before we get there. And having you here on the air staff is one way to get that started, because you'll be our conscience in the room that'll be over our shoulder going, what about allies and partners? And we just can't be talking to ourselves, because you're going to be they're kind of hold us accountable. And so I encourage you to do that while you're here on the air staff with us.
Thank you very much, sir.
Next up, sir, Mr. Andy Morse.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Andy Morse. I currently work on the air staff in A4P, working weapon system sustainment. My question this morning is regarding balancing shorter and longer term readiness. So as we look at the shorter term, some of the operational readiness, and the longer term, more structural readiness with regards to weapon system sustainment, what advice would you provide to our logisticians in the field as they navigate those changes, specifically as we continue to be tasked and working the mission of today, working towards tomorrow? So really focusing in on getting the mission done today while still working to build that force we need tomorrow.
Good. This is actually something I've been thinking quite a bit about, and I think we collectively got to do better across the Air Force. It's really how do we have a lot of data, and we have a hard time taking what's today's data, interpret that into what the impact to the future might be. And so, when we look at global force management and how we do this, one of the areas I'm focused on, how do we look at the global force management? If we were to commit capability today, how does it impact near-term readiness in the next year or so? How it impacts, longer-term readiness in the next several years, and how it impacts future modernization. I truly believe if we pull some of this data together, we could actually show that. And that's the problem I think we have as the United States. We have a difficulty showing that. We can talk about it. We can have a model that lives in the A4, but I need something as we pull a lever. This is kind of what I was saying earlier. If I pull a lever on deploying a capability now, pull it earlier or extend it, what does that impact to near-term readiness? And how do I quantify that into something that we can better articulate across the force, in terms of the Air Force, but also with the Joint Staff and with Congress and here in the building? That's the work I think we have to do. I know we can do it. It's just a matter of now pulling out our data streams together and building the models that I think we can very quickly show what that impact is. And once we show that, I really believe we'll get to these holy cow moments where you go, I had no idea. Because we have a hard time showing it and talking about it. The more we're able to do that, that'll help us preserve readiness and really articulate the risk to near-term readiness as well as future readiness. Because folks really only, more times than not, really focus on today. Tomorrow, they don't worry about. Well, as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I'm worried about tomorrow as well. So I got to worry about both. And I think the data we have will help us be able to show that if we put it in the right format. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir.
General, next one up is Master Sergeant Angela Brown.
Good morning, General Brown. I'm Master Sergeant Angela Brown, assigned to Air Staff A4LLR as a passenger travel and cargo policy section. First, I would like to say it's such an honor to be able to speak with you today. I'm a little nervous. So my question is fairly brief, but possibly impactful. So I know you've already mentioned your goals and your visions moving forward for the Air Force, the strategic approach, the 5 core missionaries, and precision logistics, just to name a few. But ultimately, what inspires you and motivates you to continue to push our the logisticians and logistics in the right path. Because as a senior, and so I would like to be able to articulate and convey that message to my younger airmen. Thank you.
Master Sergeant Brown, I would tell you what I would share with you to help motivate your young logisticians is we cannot do anything without them. Just think about it. How do we get from one location to another? How do we get a part from one location to another? How do we get fuel into our aircraft? All those things are dependent on our airmen. And they come from a number of different AFSCs within the A4 community. But I would say the same thing from across the Air Force. That's how we generate air power. And we can't do it without logistics. And we'd be fooling ourselves if we thought we could. And the way I kind of describe it, without logisticians and without quality airmen, every airplane we have, every capability we have would be a static display. Be parked on a ramp someplace and we just go out there and watch it like we're walking through a museum. That's why we require logisticians. Every time I'm on a base and start hearing jet noise, I think about how all that kind of comes together and all the airmen that go behind that one airplane getting airborne. And logisticians play a key role, like many other parts of our Air Force. And so they can be very proud of the things they do. And just think about it. Just take a day. Matter of fact, if you order something from Amazon, it didn't show up for a couple of days, and it was supposed to be in 2 days, you're still waiting for it. Think about it that way. You would get a little upset. Okay. And so the same aspects should apply for all of our airmen. If we're waiting on a capability that's dependent on legit, you guys are so important. And they really need to understand that we're counting on them to help us get the mission done. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir.
Coming up next is Miss Angela Swain.
Good morning, sir. It is such a privilege to have this opportunity to speak with you. I'm from the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center and the ISR and SOF Directorate at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In the message to the force, growing our talent and removing barriers that limit our people from realizing their full potential was a focus. And do you believe the requirement for members of the senior executive service to sign a mobility agreement should be revisited, since this may be a barrier for talented, well-qualified applicants who would otherwise apply and aspire to this level of leadership in our Air Force? Thank you.
One of the things COVID has actually shown us is that just think about it. I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C. You're sitting up there, right, Pat? We're having a conversation. And I think it's broken down some barriers that we have some opportunities. And that's part of where the Air Force is looking at. How do we look at telework versus remote work? And matter of fact, I was just in a meeting this past week with the A1 where we talked about, the opportunity to actually, you may actually be able to not have to move and live in one location for whatever reason. And maybe come TDY to the main place, but using our capabilities from a remote or telework kind of construct to be able to still be able to connect. And we've been doing that for the past year. And so the question there is, why would you go back to where you would have those mobility agreements? Where you go, you have to move, and we may have a little more flexibility, and that actually provides us opportunities to bring in some talent that may not want to stick around to be in the SCS, but they can, because now they can stay where they are, whether for family reasons or for other reasons. We can still attract talent. So I think there's an opportunity, and we actually are looking at that. Matter of fact, I was just talking to General Bunch about that this past week as well, as we look forward to this, because we got some work to do there, and on how we look to the future on how we do things differently in a post-COVID environment. And so, as bad as COVID is, as tragic as it is, it's provided some opportunities to look at things, how we do things differently. And this is one of them. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir.
Finally, General Lieutenant Alexis Gerst.
Hello, sir. It's an honor to talk with you today. I'm First Lieutenant Alexis Gerst, and I'm currently a program manager for the Joint Direct Attack Munition Program under the Lifecycle Management Center Armament Directorate at Hill Air Force Base. My question is somewhat similar to the last one, but a little bit different. So it relates to the talent recruitment and retention for both civilian and uniformed airmen. In the wake of the pandemic, many companies across the nation are currently implementing more permanent and flexible remote work options. Since the younger generation makes up an increasing majority of our workforce and values these flexible remote work options, how does the Air Force plan to overcome policy and become more competitive in recruiting and retaining the highly talented and educated human capital we need to accelerate change or lose, particularly in the functional areas such as acquisition and logistics, where the majority of the work sometimes can be done effective virtually?
Yeah. Well, Lieutenant Gerst, appreciate the question. You know, the one thing that I've found out throughout my Air Force career, you're not going to be rich doing this, so it's probably not going to be money. But it's a love of serving, and that's why many of us stick around. What I will tell you is we actually learned a lot about we have the flexibility to have flexible work schedules, and you know, in the past, it was one of those where you felt like you had to be there until the boss went home, or you know, you felt like you just would burn time there because you didn't want to go home early. Now I think we're past that. That stigma or that approach that we've had because of COVID has forced us to look at things differently. And I see it as an opportunity to have flexible work schedules. And you figure out that there's been studies that people are working harder by teleworking, working longer hours, and they're probably being more effective. And then I think the other part, it helps to flatten communication, because when you have big events like this and using Teams or Zoom, you get more people involved to have the dialogue. You get better situational awareness. You can actually make decisions faster. And so I see real value in this. Now, I will also tell you there's certain jobs you can't remote work or telework. You know, like flying an airplane. Well, I guess you can with an RPA to an extent. But we do have to think about, you know, what career fields can you do this in, and maybe in an attractive way to bring in talent to our Air Force, and give them the flexibility to do things and then retain that talent. And so I'm all for it. I think we need to continue to take a hard look at it. It'll take us some time to get through this, but I really believe the feedback we get from the field, and really from our squadron commanders and group commanders and wing commanders, as they look across and our material leaders, and they look across the Air Force, they can pretty much identify the areas that work for them. The last thing I was saying this is I'm all for it. I don't want to be very prescriptive as the chief of staff and say, you know, this location, this career field. I really want to say, I want you to be able to do this, and let the MATCOM commanders, the senior material leaders determine how best to do this at their location, because they'll know better than I will how best to do this. Because there may be a time that you know, you need to surge everybody in, or maybe a time where you can be a little more flexible. And I want to give that flexibility across the Air Force to execute. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir.
Our next question comes from Captain Jessica Watts.
Hey, sir, this is Captain Jessica Watts from Shaw Air Force Base, currently the 79th Fighter Generation Squadron Director of Operations. My question for you today is about wing organizational structure. At Shaw, we're currently doing the Fighter Generation Squadron model, and I know different bases are doing different things. My question for you is, what's the way of the future?
Matter of fact, we had this conversation with the MATCOM commanders this past week on wing organizational structure. And we're going to move out very similar to what's already happening at Shaw and the way they were organized. And we got a little extra work to do on some other areas, but that was a decision that came out of our MATCOM Commander Summit last week.
Colonel Benton, sir, it's yours.
General Brown, Colonel Ken Benton again, 309th Missile Maintenance Group, Hill Air Force Base. Hey, sir, you recently put out your leadership library, and so the question I have for you is actually as a learning leader, and you talked about not only books but podcasts. I'm very curious if you have a must-read leadership book or a must-listen-to podcast that you could share with our LOA folks.
Well, the Lincoln on Leadership by Donald T. Phillips is one of my favorites, which is why it's on the list. One that's not on the list I would offer to you that I read recently that I really enjoyed was No Rules, The Reinvention of Netflix. And it really talks about the two key parts of the book that I think are important. It talks about leadership by control or leadership by context. In Netflix, they do leadership by context. And the other part of the book, it talks about FNR, freedom and responsibility. And anybody in Netflix has the freedom to make a decision, but it also comes with a level of responsibility. I think that's the same thing I would apply for airmen. I want to empower them to have the freedom to make decisions, but with that comes some responsibility and accountability as they do that. And I think that's how we're going to be able to delegate down to a lower level. So that's a book that's on the list, but it's one I listened to, and then I went and bought it after the fact so I could skim through it again because it really resonated with me.
All right, General, those are all the questions that we have for today, sir. Do you have any closing remarks for our session today, sir?
Sure. Well, thanks, Lieutenant Riley. Appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you today and the rest of the Logistics Officers Association. I want to wish everyone the fact that I know this is the kickoff of the symposium. I hope the rest of the symposium goes very well. The other part of this, though, is just like I started with my remarks, the importance of logistics and how much I value that as not only as a chief of staff, but as a joint warfighter. I know we cannot do the things we need to do to generate the air power we need without logisticians. And so I appreciate the time that all of you are investing to come together and talk about these things. I encourage you to challenge the status quo. I encourage you to be empowered, and I want to do all we can to accelerate change so we don't lose. Thanks, and have a great day.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes this portion of the LOA Symposium. General Brown, once again, it has been an honor to have your presence here today, and we thank you for empowering our airmen to innovate our Air Force. Thank you, sir.